Hi everybody, welcome to Saturday Live at the Backyard Bird Center. Now, some of you may have seen or heard or read a story that was in the news just recently about one of my neighbors who her yard was accidentally sprayed by a pesticide company and treated the yard for mosquitoes and ticks and things like that, and they basically killed almost all the insects in her yard. She was very, very upset, came to me, and we tried to help her out, and we thought today, since a lot of you have been asking about that and the dangers of that and the importance of all the things in your yard, the pollinators and the other insects in your yard, I thought we would do our topic on that this week. And since I am not an expert in any way on insects, I brought in a friend to help me. Today with me is Mary Nemecek, who is the president of the Burroughs Audubon Society, which is our local chapter of the National Audubon here in Kansas City. And she has studied a lot harder than I have the insects and pollinators, especially the issue of conservation of pollinators. So I've brought her in to help address this topic today. So, the first mistake that a lot of people make, or it's not really a mistake, but it is an assumption that when you say pollinators, the first thing you think are honeybees, because they probably are the most famous pollinators of them. But the topic is much, much broader, and what we want to do is talk about what we've been doing over the years with our native plant sales and addressing this topic, and what you can do as a homeowner. So, hi, Mary.
Well, thanks for having me today.
Yeah. So tell us about what is a pollinator.
Right. So that's the first thing. So a pollinator is basically something that moves pollen from either the male to the female parts of one flower, which is self-pollination, or from one flower to another, cross-pollination. So we have lots of different things that can do that. Wind can do that, but primarily we think about the insects that can do that. And a good example of that is this mason bee, who you can see is all covered in pollen. So he goes after the nectar. He doesn't really care about the pollen in the flower, but plants are smart enough to put the pollen where the nectar is. So when these pollinators go after it, they get covered in it, and then they go off to another flower or to another part of that flower and pollinate it. So interesting thing about mason bees, it takes 250 female mason bees to pollinate 1 acre of an apple orchard. It would take up to 20,000 honeybees to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that honeybees are not even native to this country, right?
Right. Honeybees are not native. And so many people talk about honeybees being in trouble, but what we really kind of are worried about is our native bees, because they work harder. They get up earlier. Squash bees are out there at the crack of dawn, the minute those squash flowers open, to pollinate them. Blueberry bees can pollinate up to 50,000 flowers in their lifetime, create 6,000 blueberries. So they work when it's hotter, they work when it's colder, they work earlier in the morning, later in the day. It's really our native bees, and we have not done a lot of studies. Everybody got worried about the honeybees, and then all of a sudden we started noting collapses in our native bee populations. I thought, oh gosh.
Yeah. When we've talked here, we tell people that, like in China, they've killed so many of their native pollinators, they're actually having to pay people or make people hand pollinate their crops. Is that right?
That's correct. And University of Vermont came out with a study a couple years ago, and they actually looked at native bee populations and where they were abundant and where they were not. And if you notice, in the Midwest, kind of where we are, we're teetering on the edge of low abundance. And what that translates to is there's 139 counties, a study determined, that were at risk of not having enough pollinators to pollinate their crops. And if you notice, some of those are in kind of north central Missouri. So we need our native pollinators. They're incredibly important for a lot of reasons, and one is pollination of crops.
Okay, crops are one thing, but here in Kansas City, we don't have a lot of crops. So why is it important for us as landowners or homeowners here to, we've been doing these native plant sales, we're encouraging people to plant these native plants. Why is it important for us, and how can we help?
Well, so native plants are super important to bees. Most bees, there's 425 species of bees in Missouri. 1 out of 3 of those are dependent upon a specific source of native plants. So obviously, the more pockets or rest stops that we can create for native bees around, then the more bees we have in abundance on borders of cropland and things like that. So bees are important in your yard. If you're growing tomato plants, you have to have a bumblebee to pollinate that. But they're also important because of their interconnectivity and how they add to the network of biodiversity. The other thing is, if you want birds in your yard, you have to have pollinators. And the reason for that is there was a study that was done out of Washington, D.C., and they put 160 nest boxes in yards in Washington, D.C., and then monitored chickadee populations. So they monitored the broods and then the adults. And what they found is if you don't have 70% native plants in your yard, you cannot sustain a chickadee population.
Wow. I mean, and that's just one nest of birds. I mean,
Right.
it takes a lot of insects, and we know that a lot of birds specialize in certain kind of caterpillars they like and things. We were watching the Carolina wrens the other night eating the spiders in our yard, and that's incredible. Now, the other question that I got this week about this topic is about wasps, because I have a lot of people that are scared of bees, and they're allergic to their stings, and how they're worried about planting the native plants. Is it going to attract yellow jackets and hornets and things like that?
No, as a matter of fact, we were walking, I think it was in Target the other day, and we looked up and there was a big old wasp nest up there, and I don't know where the nearest native plant would be to that.
Sure.
So, I mean, wasps find habitat where they live, and you're not going to attract any more because of the plants that you have in your yard.
Right.
It makes a difference in, how many butterflies you get in your yard, how many birds you get in your yard, things like that, but it's not going to. And native bees are really not stingers. I mean, a lot of them don't have stingers. The males don't have stingers. And the ones that do, they're too busy nectaring. So unless you really, threaten them, they're not going to come after you. Now, if you end up with a nest of yellow jackets in your yard, that's not a bee, and they can get aggressive, especially as the summer goes on. But that, again, is not dependent upon the plants that you have in your yard at all.
Well, the other night, Mary and I were in my front yard, and we were watching the butterfly weed, one of our plants that we sell here, their native plant sale, which is coming up September 14th, the fall one, and we do one in the spring as well. So your chances to get in on that are coming up. Pre-ordering is always really important. Well, the butterfly weed, we counted 9 or 10 butterflies on there. What are they?
Zebra swallowtails.
Zebra swallowtails were on there, and there were lots of bees, and none of them were wasps. They were all little bees, little native bees that were on there, and it was just alive with activity on there. So they didn't care if we were there or not. They weren't going to sting us. It was great. So it's a great topic, and thank you for joining us today. And hopefully that's settled some people's minds and encourage you to do that. Don't spray pesticides. I had somebody tell me that, but this pesticide they sprayed said it only kills 75 bugs. No. The label says it is approved to treat or control 75 insects. That is not how many insects that chemical kills. So avoid using them. If you're going to, if you're worried about ticks and fleas and chiggers and red bugs in your yard, you recommend? I'd say spray down.
Yeah. And so I have a yard that has a woodland in it, and we have kind of a high tick population, and I treat myself. So I have some clothes that I put permethrin on early in the year. I spray myself or my kid when we're going to go back out in that area. But if I were to spray my yard, I would eliminate any food source for birds that I currently have, and I have lots of species that nest within my just little normal, little third of an acre lot. So
it is a thing we get all the time. People want to, why can't I attract bluebirds nest in my yard? And then, what, do you have a lawn service? Yeah, they kill all the grubs and everything. They kill the food sources. So, there's the answer. So, again, thanks for coming on today. Thanks for the idea for the program.
Question.
I got a question. What is it?
What about natural spraying?
Natural, interesting. So I have a lot of people that'll say, what about eucalyptus oil or citronella or mint? There's no studies that I am aware of on their effectiveness. Some people use Skin So Soft. If I'm going out in the woods and I'm worried about getting a mosquito-borne or a tick-borne illness, I am going to treat myself with what I know works. And so that's why I have clothes soaked with permethrin, and I use, a high DEET concentration spray on myself. But natural remedies, I can't speak to them because I just don't know that the data is there.
And I'm really hoping that there are going to be more studies now, that the awareness is being raised of the importance of these pollinators, and that there are going to be more studies on the effectiveness of some of these natural remedies. I really hope so.
She says, True Green says they use natural spray. TRU.
So I don't know what that means. I had a dermatologist one time that said, poison ivy is natural, but I wouldn't tell you to go rub that on your skin.
Right.
So, most things are made from some sort of basic natural compound because that's what we have on this planet, and they may be modified or synthesized into something else. But I don't know what a natural spray is, and I'm guarantee you if it kills one kind of insect, it is going to kill all of them.
And how chemicals kill these insects, and they is usually the absorption through the insect skin or through the respiratory system, and it blocks and inhibits them from being able to either breathe or some other function in their body. And if natural chemicals did a lot of that, then there would be, you think there'd be a whole lot less insects, and so that's why I always have a lot of doubt in these natural remedies. But I don't know, because again, I am not a chemist, and I am not definitely not a herpetologist. I'm not an insect person, entomologist. I am an ornithologist. So there's a lot of questions, and I encourage. I mean, you got a young man who's going into, or a young woman going into this avenue of study. Encourage them to pursue researching that kind of thing, because we need answers. We really do.
And we know, like, monarchs will eat milkweed because it's poisonous. So it's poisonous to cattle. It's poisonous to us if we eat it.
Right.
Don't eat milkweed. But it's a fantastic pollinator plant in your yard, and it's the protection that the monarch uses. So natural does not mean safe. The two do not equate to each other.
Exactly. All right. Great program. Thanks for, and a great idea for a program. Send in ideas for future programs. We try to do it every week around noon, and we appreciate you tuning in. Give us a like if you would. Share these with your friends and family, and that helps us out. And come by and let's talk birds.